What's up, everybody? And thank you guys for joining us here on the NFL Draft Show on The Grueling Truth, where legends speak. My name is Dan Kornhauser.
And I'm Sam Teets.
And, guys, I want to say Happy New Year before anything gets off the ground. Happy New Year. Hope everyone had an awesome holiday season. Again, thank you all for joining us. Sam, Happy New Year's.
Happy New Year to you too.
Cheers, buddy. Now, we got a lot to talk about this show. I'm excited. We are right at the national championship. It's going to be a week from tonight. I'm going to be at the bar with my buddies watching it. I'm excited to get wings, some cold ones with the boys. It's going to be awesome. And it's going to be fun to be the one draft guy at the bar and talk about prospects with these guys and sound like good old Mel Kiper or somebody like that.
Sound like you know everything, right? You're going to be the smart one.
Oh, yeah, it's great. It's great. It's great to sound like the smartest guy in the room. So, but no, I love the national championship in general. I love college football. So this is an exciting game. Georgia, Alabama, pretty much what everyone thought it would be for the most part. And it was a very disappointing weekend. It was. Bama took care of Cincinnati. I didn't think Cincinnati looked like they belonged. And it was for a couple of different reasons. We'll get to that and break that down a little bit. And then on the flip side with Georgia, they absolutely dominated Michigan. The SEC, both teams showed why the SEC is the best conference every year, why Alabama won the national chip last year, why they are in the chip again. And these teams, they just keep showing why they're at the top of the top. And it just sucks for Cincinnati fans and Michigan fans who had a chance, particularly Michigan, really thought they had a chance in that one. It didn't really come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, of the four teams, I felt like Michigan played like the worst. Michigan to me did not look competitive whatsoever. Like, at least with Cincinnati, they had that first drive in the first quarter, like the first possession they had. They go out on the field. If not for Desmond having the ball blocked at the line of scrimmage, he had a wide open Alec Pierce in the end zone. It would have been 7-7 at that point. Ends up being 7-3. They go down and get a field goal. First drive of the second half, it's close at some point. But the Michigan game, it at no point was ever close. Michigan ends up getting 11 points because Georgia put like their third stringers in on defense at the end of the game, and Michigan eventually gets a touchdown. It's a shame because it's two of those teams, like the games never felt like they were in doubt. Outside of maybe the first 10 minutes of that game between Alabama and Cincinnati, we knew who was going to win. It's just a shame that we didn't get to see good football. At least the Rose Bowl came through. The Rose Bowl always comes through.
No, yeah, that was a good one, which is, again, it's always a good game, like you said, but this is the college football playoff really left me kind of deflated overall. Because like you said, we were hoping for good football, and we didn't even get that. Yeah, let's talk about the Georgia-Michigan game since you mentioned them as such a disappointment. Talking about disappointments, how about Aiden Hutchinson being a complete no-show? Literally a non-factor in any possible way. Georgia just ran the ball at will. Cook looked great. That offensive line looked great. And that Michigan front they got completely dominated. And for a guy like Hutchinson to literally just disappear, it says a lot. It says a lot to what Georgia did there.
Georgia really dominated up front in that game. I think I mentioned the trenches are going to be huge in this one. Mm-hmm. Hutchinson really doesn't make much of an impact whatsoever. He's got one pressure in the game overall, so he's not getting to the quarterback. He's got 4 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss, so it's not like he was totally blank, but again, compared to what we expect from Aiden Hutchinson, just not a good performance. On the other hand, David Ojabo, the other edge rusher we always talk about, I think he actually was blanked. I don't think he had a tackle in that game. So you're in a situation now where you have one of your best defensive players does not show up whatsoever. And I know that they had some issues. There's some guys who are banged up. I think Brad Hawkins got hurt a little bit early on in the game. I think was it Hill? I think it was Daxton Hill, who ended up going to the game and having recently had COVID or something like that. So they weren't even sure he was going to play. So there was some stuff there, but at the same time, I mean, they got just absolutely blown off the field. Stetson Bennett, who everyone's questioning, should he even start for Georgia going forward after the Alabama game, comes out and he looks incredible for them. 20 for 30 for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns. There's a reason why he's playing. JT Daniels is still on the bench.
And that's impressive because Daniels himself was considered to be a potential NFL draft pick himself. And He's not been able to see the field. I think that says more about him than it does anything else. But with Michigan being just so underwhelming on both sides of the ball, they couldn't get anything going on offense. They couldn't do, and once they got down and it got to the point where they had to pass, it was over. Their quarterback play has been mediocre all season. It was the one big bugaboo that I thought this team had. They just don't have good quarterbacks. I know they shuffled them throughout the season and had a couple of different guys starting and whatnot, but it showed up. And it showed up in an ugly way. Nobody on Michigan looked good. But on the flip side, aside from the complete disappointment that Michigan was, Georgia came to play. And it wasn't just the offense that showed up. The defense played well. Trayvon Walker went in. He had a bunch of big plays. He stood out for me just watching the game, not even reviewing it afterwards, just literally watching the game. He stood out. So did actually Jordan Davis. Now, you know, when you're 6'6", 350 pounds, it's expected that you'll stand out amongst any sort of group of people anywhere. But he showed up big and he clogged up the middle, and he showed some push. I was impressed. He has had trouble this season showing up on all three downs, and we discussed this in previous shows where we've seen him mocked high and have high first-round grades pretty much all season, mid-first round, high first round, but neither one of us really see him as much of a pass rusher. And even though he has some physical skills, being a two-down run stopper in today's NFL is not that valuable, no matter how good you are at stuffing the run, unless you're Vita Vea. But Davis looked good too, and he showed that physicality that he has and the athleticism that he has that he doesn't show often when he's pushing the pocket, but he showed it, and I was impressed with those two guys in particular.
Yeah, with Davis, I think he has explosiveness. It's not that he doesn't. There was one play where he got into the backfield, and I forget if it was chasing the quarterback or running back, but you saw like the burst to end up closing that gap and able to just make the tackle. I think he has that explosive playmaking ability. The issue is that it's in bursts. You know, you're not going to get him to come off the line of scrimmage. And he's a pocket pusher as opposed to a pocket collapser for me. Like, you know, there's a difference there. You can walk a lineman back maybe, but you're not going to knock him over. You're not going to put a swim move on him or anything like that. So Jordan Davis to me is still, you know, despite the big performance, he's still kind of that two-down guy at the next level that someone's probably going to take in the first round because it's the name recognition, it's the brand at this point. But the guy that really stood out to me was actually Nakobe Dean. And Nakobe Dean is a bit of a smaller player. That's probably the biggest criticism of him. He's 6 foot, 225 pounds. He's probably under 6 feet, if we're being honest. But he is everything you want in a typical linebacker for today's NFL. And today, I think you're going to see him probably used in the NFL a little bit in the way Devin Bush is in Tampa Bay, just a little bit, because he had 5 pressures in this game. For the year, he has 28 pressures. That's the most on Georgia's team. You know, tied for the most, I think, with Walker. So Dean is a threat in the pass rush, and his biggest role is in coverage. I mean, he is tremendous in coverage. He had 4 targets. They targeted him 4 times in this game. He allowed 2 catches for -2 yards. You know, you cannot beat this guy with a running back in pass coverage. You can't. And frankly, he moves around so well. I saw on one play where he actually tracked the player all the way across the line of scrimmage from one side to the other and ends up making the tackle in the backfield, and they throw him the ball. He is a tremendous athlete, and he's going to fit perfectly at the next level.
And as far as Nakobe Dean, you know how I feel about him. I listed him as my top non-premier position player on, you know, besides what's his face, Kyle Hamilton.
Yeah.
So you know how much I love Nakobe Dean, and I'm probably going to have a first-round grade on him when it's all said and done. And he had arguably the second best game of the season, and according to PFF, it was his second best game of the season behind the Florida game. They graded him at a 90. Against Michigan, whereas against Alabama the week before they had him at a 74.6, which was a little below average for him over the course of the season. So you're on point there. Now, in terms of Aiden Hutchinson, because I do want to go back to him for a hot second, it was really disappointing, that game.
Yeah.
Does this game affect his grade at all? Does it give you any pause, any concerns that if you're one of those top 2 or 3 teams and he's on the board for you, you might look at this game and really look back at the tape and see what you were missing? Or is this just a flash in the pan? Georgia was better on this day.
Well, I think it shows that he has good explosiveness, but not necessarily like elite track type speed. You saw there was one play with Stenson Bennett ends up running away from him and kind of making a play downfield. I forget if he threw it or he just ended up running overall, but he doesn't have that super closing speed per se. He's still really good in pursuit, but he's not going to run down some of the quicker players. That being said, if you look at the game and think, what could Kayvon Thibodeau has done better? I don't know that you walk away saying that someone like Kayvon Thibodeau is going to perform much better than Aiden Hutchinson did in that situation, considering guys like Jamari Salyer on the offensive line who are bigger, stronger guys who maybe can get your hands on you a little bit earlier and make an impact on you. So I walk away thinking that, yeah, this is not good. This is not good tape. This is not good performance to have. But you also have another star passer who some people view as a first-round pick in David Ojabo, who did absolutely nothing. So I walked into saying Georgia had a really good game plan. Georgia knew what they wanted to do, and they executed, and Michigan had no answers for it. I view it more as a coaching thing than a player personnel issue.
So if you're sitting in the top three and Aiden Hutchinson's sitting there for you, this doesn't give you any pause at all.
No, not really. It really doesn't. I'm also looking at the other players on the board. It's not like Aiden Hutchinson's the only one. Like one game might raise some question marks, sure, but everyone else, Derek Stingley with the injuries, Kyle Hanson's coming off an injury this year. He plays safety. There's question marks for all these guys. But Aiden Hutchinson in this game to me is a little issue compared to some of the other ones you're going to have to deal with for other top prospects.
Now, let's move over to the other game. But before we do, because I always slack on this, I got to show some love to betting.net because, of course, we are powered by betting.net. And betting.net is your best bet for sportsbook and casino sites. So head on over to betting.net. Now, let's talk about Alabama-Cincinnati. That wasn't a game either. And after Alabama's first drive, where they ran the ball like 8 times or something like that on that first drive, and they just ran down Cincinnati's throat, Brian Robinson Jr. looked solid. He looked very good. That offensive line controlled Cincinnati's front seven. They had no answer for him. They let Alabama run all over him. And Cincinnati's offense didn't show up either. And it's I don't really know what to say because it was that disappointing.
It's a very negative reflection on Desmond Ridder.
It is. He was not accurate.
That's what it is.
He wasn't good. He was jittery. And he was a potential first-round pick, because we know how this position gets pushed up draft boards. I mean, Jesus. Let's not forget Christian Ponder and E.J. Manuel and Jake Locker and all those clowns who got pushed up. But granted, some of those guys were because of the shortened off season, but it's also the quarterback position. Let's be honest. So Ridder could have been a late first round pick if he interviewed well, and I think he's in the Senior Bowl. I'd have to double check that.
I believe so too.
But if he showed out in the postseason, he could have been a first round pick. Now, whereas with Aiden Hutchinson, there's absolutely no concern about his draft grade. I think Desmond Ridder can be knocked down a few pegs at this point, if he wasn't already.
Yeah, I already had him being great, I think, in the 60s on my top 300 big board. I don't know. I have to check. But I had him outside the first round for sure. And this is a guy who last year, I'll talk about him last year, he could be like that upside QB you take and develop. And he could have gone potentially third round, late second round last year. And he comes back to school hoping to improve his grade and improve where he's going to end up. But frankly, I don't know that he did have his best season of his college career, but I don't really know that he's moved at all. I don't know if he's changed. I have him at 65 on my top 300 big board. I don't know if he's gone anywhere. That's probably where he was about last year. I mean, somewhere in the 60s to 80s. So frankly, I think even after coming back, even after all this, Desmond Ridder is still kind of viewed as this second, maybe fringe third round quarterback. He's probably going to go in the second round because he's QB, but I don't view him as like an answer in the NFL.
Yeah, he was telegraphing passes, and I mean, let's be honest, Cincinnati didn't look good at all on offense. They couldn't get anything really going on the ground either. No one was making plays on the outside. What do you want the man to do? We already knew Ridder wasn't going to be able to carry the team like that. When nothing else is really working around him, Alabama was dominant. We could expect nothing less. But was there anyone in this game in particular that stood out for you on either team as you're watching it and said, "Damn, this kid is good."
Well,
I mean,
obviously
there was a
Brian
lot of
Robinson.
guys, but someone in
Yeah,
particular.
yeah. Well, obviously Brian Robinson Jr. because it's not. I won't say a weak running back class because there's still good running backs in this group. There's still starting caliber running backs, but Brian Robinson Jr. to me probably elevated himself to being like a top 7 running back in this class. He doesn't have the natural bend or like the super speed or anything like that. Doesn't have a ton of burst. But guys just can't tackle him. They fall off him. He's got power. He'll grind out yards. And we saw a guy like Ramondre Stevenson come in for the Patriots this year. I don't know what he's at yards wise right now, but he has to be around like 500 plus yards at this point. And you saw his whole thing is just gain yards, just run guys over, just kind of break tackles and gain yards after contact. I think Brian Robinson Jr. can do something similar to that. And the way offenses run right now in the NFL with the running back tandems and stuff like that, I think he'll really fit in those kind of equations. I think Brian Robinson Jr. might go in the top 100 picks now because of this performance, showing that he can show out and have these kind of big games multiple times this season where he just creates yards after contact. And he does it at a high level. And one more guy I want to mention on Cincinnati, Najee Sanders on the defense. I think the defensive NFL prospects for Cincinnati actually played up to where I expected them to be for the most part. You know, Ahmad Gardner, we didn't get to see Jameson Williams play his typical deep role against Gardner, which was really disappointing. But he held Jameson Williams, I think, 2 receptions for -1 yards. And granted, Alabama's throwing everything short, but Ahmad Gardner locked up when he had to play against Jameson Williams. Najee Sanders had 10 pressures in this game. That's a season high for him. And he was all over the place. I don't think he got a sack, but he was absolutely dogging Bryce Young the entire day. So I think those 2 guys to me really stood out as players who have lived up to the hype.
For me, I want to go with who you mentioned, one of the guys you mentioned, Ahmad Gardner, because when they played head up, Gardner played him tough. Like you said, he held him to, 2 catches?
2 catches for -1 yards.
Crazy. And he looked good on third down. He looked good in zone coverage. He looked good head up. And I think this is one of those games where, with Hutchinson, it didn't really affect his grade. No big deal. With Ritter, we knocked down his grade significantly in our eyes. But with Gardner, man, I think this just solidified his position. He may very well be the cornerback 2 in this class, and he might be even cornerback 1 on some teams' boards because he actually played this year, and he looked damn good doing it. He's got the size. He's got everything you look for at the position. He's got the length. We've seen him be more than willing to tackle, more than willing to play in different coverages, press up, off zone, whatever. And he's really, really shown out, and he's impressed me. So I want to give him some love. And then on the flip side, Will Anderson. I know we've talked about him a little bit before, and we know he's going to be a top 2 or 3 pick next year. Not really for this year's class, but damn, he was unblockable. He did whatever he wanted to do. I'd have to double check the stats, but I know he had at least 2 sacks in this game, and he was in the backfield all night, just absolute dominance. I couldn't be more impressed.
Yeah, I think a lot of the young guys, too, that's the thing. Alabama didn't have either of their starting corners in this game because I know Josh Jobe had foot surgery, so he was out. Mm-hmm. And then their other corner, Jalen Armour Davis, comes in, tries to play, can't really go. So you had their backup corners in for Alabama, and they still were kicking your butt if you're Cincinnati. So I think it really doesn't look that good for the offense. And you're thinking about it in terms of that perspective.
Yep, so I'm looking at it. He had 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss. And that brought him to the season 17 and a half sacks in 14 games, 33 and a half tackles for loss. Just stop for a second and understand how ridiculous that is.
This man was not invited to the Heisman Trophy ceremony.
Dude.
He was not in New York.
It's one thing for guys to put up crazy college stats. We see it every year. And at this point, you don't really bat an eye in most cases. You say, 15 sacks. Cool. Sometimes half the time it would be some random dude from like Arkansas State or or Bowling Green or some nonsense like that. Some nobody just dominating lower competition. We see special stuff like that. But Will Anderson, 33 and a half tackles for loss. Second place is Devin Lloyd, the Utah linebacker, with 22.
Special kid. He's special, man.
I mean, even if you don't want to look at stats and say, oh, well, stats don't matter, whatever, they're not that big of a deal in the equation of scouting. Sure, there's something to that. Stats aren't everything. But when they stand out like this, you have to take notice. And it's worth talking about. So now that brings us to the championship game. And we're going to have to make our prediction here and see who's right and who's butt. But before we do that, I want to let everyone know that your top sportsbook comparison site is betting.net, and betting.net offers extensive reviews on the best sports books out there. So head on over to betting.net. Now, Georgia, Bama, heavyweights. I don't know boxing, but Frazier and Ali, right? That was the big one, right?
Yep, that's a big one.
Boom. That's what we're looking at right here. I'm sure Mike would be proud because I know he loves boxing. And on The Grueling Truth, there's a lot of boxing podcasts and articles and stuff like that. So, I don't know anything about boxing, but I know that much, which is great. So this is what we're looking for. This is what we want to see. We want to see two upper echelon teams with tons of NFL talent on both sides, with two very good head coaches. One side's got the GOAT and Kirby Smart on the other side, who's not a slouch. He's no slouch. All right. He's proven himself. Who's your favorite? Your favorite. Because we know Alabama's the favorite, whatever. Vegas is on them. Cool. But is it really all Bama? Or does Georgia have a legit shot at this?
I think it's going to be Bama. I understand I hope Georgia's going to come out and make a lot of adjustments, but we saw teams in Michigan and Cincinnati that just were one-trick ponies, kind of didn't make any adjustments during the games when they were getting their butts kicked. I hope Georgia has taken notes and is going to be willing to go out there and make some adjustments, because they have to play differently than they did the first time around when Alabama just opened things up to the air and beat them 41-24. They have to play differently. And I'm hoping the difference that they're going to adjust to is trying to get that running game established a little bit more frequently, a little bit more often, and then doing something just to take away Jameson Williams deep, because Jameson Williams deep is what killed them in the first game. There's no John Mechie this time around. John Mechie had 6 receptions for 97 yards and a touchdown last game. He's not going to be there. So now you have one less piece to worry about on offense. Just focus on trying to take Jameson Williams away deep. So you saw what Cincinnati did. They made him keep everything short. And that worked fine. Jameson Williams did not have a big game. Try to keep them short. And Bryce Young, frankly, looked uncomfortable in the game against Cincinnati. So just keep everything short, keep things underneath. And if Bama tries running the ball, Georgia's got a defensive line that can actually stop it if you have 3 or 4 men up front, unlike Cincinnati. So I feel more comfortable if you just keep things in front. You keep things in front of the safeties. Don't let things over the top. And try to force Alabama to run the ball. But Bama's still going to win.
I was going to say, do you really want to try to do that? Do you really want to try to make Bama beat you on the ground? Because let's be honest, they can, and they can do it with anyone in the nation. They got the horses up front. They got the studs in the backfield, particularly Robinson Jr. You really want to go and tell them run on us? Is that what you really want to do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want them to try to run, because if you make them throw the ball at Jameson Williams against this Georgia secondary, the Georgia secondary does not have a ton of speed. Your top cover corner, Darion Kendrick, is pretty good in zone. He was from Clemson. I got to see him play, but he struggles with speed. Roman Wilson beat him in the Michigan game once or twice deep. He only got 1 deep reception on it, but he struggles with speed. You don't want him going against Jameson Williams. So frankly, keep everything short. And yeah, it's going to be a bit of a grinded out game, but you have guys like Devontae Wyatt, Trevon Walker, Jordan Davis for this reason. So I'm expecting them to try to keep things short, try to play it where you have to force Alabama to run the ball and go from there. I mean, that's what I think your defensive game plan has to be. I would invite that, because I would rather do that and have them grind it out and try to win every play like that, and have 15-play drives than have a 4-play drive that ends in a 68-yard touchdown pass.
Now, Robinson's coming off a 200-yard performance. It's 26 carries, 204 yards on the ground, and his backup, Trey Sanders, had 14 carries for 67. So that's quite the bold statement when you're talking about a team that ran for almost 300 yards as a unit. and saying, well, that's your best chance at winning. Is it really because you think the matchup of Williams and his speed is really that much bigger with him and Young, to the point where if you're Georgia, you say, yo, these guys can beat us through the air. Let's stop that, and let's hope our big guys up front control the line of scrimmage. I don't know, man. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, we know how good Young is, and we know how good Williams is, and how good this passing offense can be, even without Mechie. But I don't know. So, is there a matchup in this game, whether it be a unit versus a unit, O-line versus D-line, or the corners versus the receivers, or even an individual matchup that you're looking forward to in this game? Of course, with an eye on the draft.
Yeah, well, obviously it's the offensive line with Evan Neal and guys like Chris Owens and hopefully Emil Ekiyor Jr. for Alabama versus that dominant defensive front for Georgia. But we've already talked about that quite a bit. The one I want to see is if George Pickens is healthy. I want to see George Pickens versus the backup Alabama cornerbacks. Because George Pickens is still a guy viewed as being like a top 10 receiver in this class and still as a top 100 player, despite not being healthy all year long, despite not playing a lot. But he is their big play guy outside of Brock Bowers, who's not draft eligible at tight end. Pickens is the one guy they can rely on to make offense, and he just has not been healthy. He's not played a lot of snaps. You got to be desperate to try to get this guy on the field against Alabama, because right now, Brock Bowers is great. But Brock Bowers is not going to beat you alone if you're like Alabama. Alabama will let Brock Bowers have his day. But you're not so worried about him necessarily as you would be if George Pickens could play too, and you got two guys like that out there. Two guys who are top 50 talents, top 32 talents in their respective drafts, that would be massive.
And do we want to do prediction right now? Do we want to get that out of the way?
Yeah, probably. We probably should just do it. Oh, and by the way, I'm looking at the betting line right now.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, it's 3 points in favor of Georgia.
Really?
So Alabama's going to win by like 40 points.
Really? Now, I'm sure I don't know much about how these lines swing or whatever like that, but I would assume it's mostly people just betting. It was a favorable line for Georgia. Now all the bets are swinging towards Georgia, so they're trying to balance it out.
It opened as a 2.5 point favorite for Georgia. Now it's up to 3 point favorite for Georgia. So it's interesting. I don't know. I feel like this is something like Alabama will take and just put on the whiteboard and be like, hey, we crushed them, but here we go again. Thinking Georgia's going to win. I just don't understand the logic in this.
Now, I do want to ask you one more question before we make a prediction. So I'm looking at my big board, and at least on my list of prospects, and for Bama, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I got 17 guys with draftable grades, and for Georgia, I have 16. Okay. Now I know we've had some heavyweight matchups of Clemson versus Bama and so on and so forth recently, but when you look at these teams, we're talking about 32 NFL draft prospects just for this year's draft, not even future drafts. So we're not talking about Young, we're not talking about Williams, we're not talking about anybody else. We're talking about just guys who are either already in this year's draft, or they're seniors, or they're likely to declare, or whatever. Where do you think this national championship game stacks against previous national championship games or college football playoff games in terms of NFL talent going against NFL talent? Do you think it stacks more towards the top, more middle range? What are your thoughts on overall? I
think it's got to be towards the top. I'm going to pull up the history just to double check, but I think the one team that sticks out to me is like having the most future NFL talent. I just remember it would be LSU. The LSU game against Clemson, they just flattened the Tigers. That one sticks out to me as being like the one where the team with the most future NFL talent. That team is just loaded. As far as games, though, I think this probably has to be at the top because it's both sides, like you mentioned. There's going to be literally a full round of players from both these teams coming out of this game. So I think this has to be close to the top. I mean, probably top 2, top 3. I'm trying to pull up the thing right now to see the past couple of games. So I'm trouble finding it. I don't remember a game in situation looking at it now. LSU versus Clemson. I think that one had a lot of talent. Alabama, Ohio State last year had quite a few talented players as well with Mac Jones, Justin Fields. But I think this year the depth is more significant. Maybe not the star power. You don't have like a Devontae Smith per se. You don't really have a Justin Fields versus a Mac Jones, 2 future first-round guys. But I think the depth of talent is the best it's been in any college football matchup so far.
All right, so with that in mind, let's make some picks, shall we?
Yep, let's go ahead.
It's about that time. So here we go. Georgia, Bama. Who do you got? It's Georgia -3. Let's bet on the line.
Yeah, I'm taking Alabama. I'm taking Alabama to cover. Like, there's no way. I'm taking Alabama to win outright and to cover. Just because I think you can make adjustments if you're Georgia, like I mentioned. Make Alabama change their game plan drastically from what they did against you last time. But Nick Saban is a better head coach than Kirby Smart. Bryce Young's a better quarterback than Stetson Bennett. And frankly, I just trust Alabama to have the answers and to make adjustments. From what I've seen the college football playoffs this year, the teams that are losing these games are not making any adjustments. And they're coming to the games and look totally underwhelming, totally unprepared. I think Georgia will be better than that, obviously. But I expect Nick Saban to have his team better prepared and be able to make adjustments quicker and more on the fly. I don't think you're going to have that from Georgia at that same level, so I'm taking Alabama.
All right. I'm going to take Alabama as well. This line is a little confusing. Not exactly sure why it's these guys were -2, Georgia's -2, now Georgia's -3. There's something there that we're not seeing, but I'm going to go with Alabama as well. But I'm just hoping this is a better game than what we've seen so far.
Really? Yeah.
That's all I really want, man. That's all anyone really wants. Neither one of us are Bama or Georgia fans, so we're gonna watch the game regardless. A, because we enjoy it. B, because we got to scout it. But I just want a good game, man. I don't want to have to see some one-way game where Bennett has to throw 50 times or something like that.
Yeah.
It's whack.
What do you think? If you think about it, the last good national championship game was Alabama versus Georgia back in the year was 2018, so the 2017 season. Because the past 3 games since then, Clemson with Trevor Lawrence blew out Alabama. Joe Burrow and LSU blew out Clemson. And then Alabama blew out Ohio State last year. So hopefully we get a better national championship this time around.
So with that in mind, we both pick Alabama. And before we move forward and go to our last segment, which will be talking about the offensive line, I do want to remind everyone that we are powered by betting.net. And the Grueling Truth is powered by betting.net. Betting.net is your best bet for finding the online casino or sportsbook that's right for you. So head on over to betting.net. Place a bet on Bama if you like those odds, like we do. I might very well do that after we get off the air, make some money. But let's wrap up this week's episode, the first one of the new year, talking about the offensive line, talking about the big hog mollies up front. Now, we've talked extensively about quarterbacks. We've sprinkled in some D-backs and stuff like that. We've talked about Ojabo and Hutch and different guys, but we haven't really talked about the offensive line. We haven't given them much love. The offensive line is going to probably see at least one guy taken in the top 5 for sure. They might very well see a couple in the top 15 if Tyler Linderbaum is taken high, or even Kenyon Green is taken that high, as I know you put him to Pittsburgh in our mock draft that we did last week, or even Charles Cross if he goes in the top 10. We could have 4 or 5 offensive linemen in the top 15 if it gets crazy. Evan Neal, Ike Mekwanu, Charles Cross, Kenyon Green, Tyler Linderbaum. Those are the top 5 offensive linemen, I want to say, regardless of order. Am I missing somebody?
No, that's from what I can tell, the top 5 going in as well.
Who is your top offensive lineman available, and why is it Neal?
It's Neal. Yeah, it's Neal right now in my top 300, but I have my concerns. I think right now the community as a whole is split 50-50 between Ekwonu and Neal being the top offensive tackle.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best offensive lineman overall is Tyler Linderbaum, but we've talked about this before. He's not going to be the first guy taken because he plays center.
Mm-hmm.
The concerns with Neal obviously are going to be he's got the size, the athleticism, all that kind of stuff. The question is going to be some of the development, some of the stuff we've seen where he's just not necessarily performing up to the levels in pass protection that you would hope he would. And to some extent, he's not always as physical and as dominant in the running game as you would expect him to be. So I think some of the concerns will be definitely the flaws in pass protection and his ability to just stay consistent and not really lose control or lean too much into his athleticism as opposed to working on the technique. Because he is still, he's an experienced player. He's played left tackle, right tackle, and left guard. He's expected to be a tackle in the NFL. But I just still worry about him sometimes leaning too much on the physical gifts as opposed to the development.
When I was looking through tape, some of the things that stood out for me with Neal, I also have him as a top 5 prospect in this class. It wouldn't surprise me if Jacksonville took him first overall, but there is something to your concerns about him in pass blocking, because as a run blocker, zero concerns. Totally engulfs whoever he's going against. He's got the movement to get to the second level. But when he gets in pass protection, speed rushers have given him problem off the edge. His footwork has been inconsistent in that he doesn't always keep his feet moving, and he misses out on consistent leverage when he needs it. But I think this is all more nitpicking, to be honest. I don't think he's, a near perfect prospect or anything like that, because as you said, the scouting community is pretty split between him and Ekanu. So I guess it would be like, what's your flavor kind of a thing. But for me personally, I think it's clear that Neal is the best. Any issues he might have with pad leverage in short yardage situations or handling speed rushers off the edge, because he doesn't have that elite quickness off the snap that some of these tackles we've seen recently, like a Wirfs, for example, had that elite sidestep when he was stepping out in pass protection, and he could make those adjustments on the fly quickly, and his feet were blur pretty much for an offensive tackle is what you're looking for. That's why Wirfs has continued to show out in Tampa Bay. And he's one of the top young tackles in the league for a reason. So I don't think he's quite on that level, and he's definitely not that athlete. But I think it's nitpicking, I think, at this point with him. I wouldn't have any issues if I needed an offensive tackle taking him top 5. And like I said, if Jacksonville took him number 1, if they want to build around Trevor Lawrence, that's not the dumbest thing in the world. We just seen what Cincinnati did with Joe Burrow. They drafted Burrow, and then they built around him. They drafted offensive linemen, drafted receivers. They built it around Burrow. So if Jacksonville decides that's the way to go, then good. They're going to probably lose Cam Robinson anyway. One Alabama offensive tackle out the door. Another one steps in to replace him just as girthy. But aside from Neal, is Ekwonu your second best offensive lineman on your board, or is it indeed Linderbaum?
Well, Linderbaum, I think, is my first best offensive lineman, number 4. Then I have Evan Neal at 5. So I have a lot of faith in Linderbaum, frankly. But number 3 for me, number 2 tackle is Ekwonu. And I think it's funny because I was on board the let Ekwonu play tackle train earlier in the season. And as he's gotten higher and higher up draft boards where people are talking about taking him in the top 10, I've kind of backed off a little bit. I think top 10 is sometimes a little bit worrisome for me, but I do view him as one of these guys who come in and be a solid player right away. I don't think he'll be this kind of all-pro player. I don't think he has that ceiling. He's got a higher floor, though, than someone like Evan Neal and me, because he can play guard if you need him to. But I do view him as a tackle prospect because he's such an asset in the running game. He is tremendous run blocker. He's a better run blocker than Evan Neal. He's more mobile, I think, than Evan Neal is, frankly. Because you can pull him if you want to, and he'll pull and he'll get to wherever you need him to go. So I think his footwork in space is terrific. I love that part about his game. The reason why he's viewed as a tackle prospect now and not a guard prospect like he was going into the season is because he allowed 13 pressures this year compared to 25 last year, only 3 sacks this year to 7 last year. The game I'll point to is Clemson. 56 pass blocking snaps against Clemson. No sacks allowed, only 2 pressures. And Clemson's got some guys who are going to be playing at the NFL level at defense, and probably 3 or 4 of them on the roster right now will make it into the draft past next couple of years. So I think that game stands with me as a huge one. Boston College, just 1 pressure allowed. And he really had a great season. And Ekwonu, to me, like I said, it's kind of like a choose your flavor thing. I think he'll be better in some areas, especially like the running game than Neal. Maybe not as polished in the passing game as Neal, but for certain schemes, he'll definitely be a better fit than Neal in terms of being able to go in and be productive right away. Where maybe your pass protection is not as focused and you're not as much on an island as some of our schemes.
Now, with Ekwonu, right? I said it right?
Yep, you got it.
Finally. Okay. So with Ekwonu, whereas Neal doesn't have that upper echelon foot speed that you look for, that quickness that you look for, Ekwonu has. He has that. And I don't know if it's because his mom was a high school track star and his dad was a college basketball star in Nigeria, but it doesn't hurt to have athletic parents and stuff like that. So I'm sure that's part of it, just good genes. But he has the quickness that I feel Neal doesn't have. Even if it's not the top of the, the upper echelon guys, it's still close enough where I think it's better than Neal. But I think Neal is the better offensive tackle prospect. Do you think either one of these two guys fits a particular system better? Like if Neal got drafted to a zone blocking team, do you think he would be as successful there as he would in a straight up man on man run blocking scheme or something like that? Whatever. But do you think these guys are more fit for any specific system, or do you think they're pretty much plug and play regardless?
I like my guys to be plug and play, if I'm being honest. I try not to pigeonhole dudes into one scheme. I know it doesn't always work out, but I think at the top of the draft, if you feel like the guy you're taking at the top of the draft can only play one scheme, what are you doing? I get that. Like, I get some guys might be more successful in areas, but you try to find guys who you feel like can be generational or universal fits. Mm-hmm. And will a team, a guy like Ekwonu would absolutely be better served in an offense like, I don't know, San Francisco than somewhere like where you're playing just, or even New England, somewhere like New England perhaps. They're not going to draft guys because those teams already have the offensive lineman they want. But they would absolutely be better off in situations like that than a team that's going to drop back and throw the ball 50 times a game. I think that'll be much better. And I think the teams that will use Ekwonu for his athleticism, get him to move around the line, get him to pull a little bit, don't have him just line up mono and go. Neal, on the other hand, I don't want him moving as much. I want Neal staying more mono. I don't want him trying to pull too much and do too much extra stuff initially. But realistically, I mean, with the mobility these guys have at their size, I don't think there's huge restrictions on them.
Now with Ekwonu, I know Neal, you mentioned it, started as a freshman. He started at left guard, did not give up a sack. Sophomore, he moved to right tackle. Now he's at left tackle. Ekwonu was something similar. His first year, he started as a true freshman at left guard, and then he started at left tackle later on in the season. And that's pretty much where he's been more or less, but he's shown he can play all over the line. Does that add to his value to the point where we might actually see a team have him as their top tackle and maybe if he tests right or whatever in the combine, maybe even take him ahead of Neal? Do you think that's even possible at this point?
Him being taken ahead of Neal, absolutely. The fact that he played guard a little bit probably does not boost him ahead of Neal because we know Neal can play guard. And even though I think at this point in his career, I don't know if he would actually be a fit to go back to that position, frankly. I feel like Ekwonu, it would be more acceptable to move him back to guard, whereas with Neal, I think you're just looking at a pure tackle prospect going forward. I don't think that really changes anything because you're going to draft these guys that high in the top 10. You're drafting them to play tackle. And yeah, granted, you do like to have the security of being able to fall back and throw a guy into guard. But if you run to that position where you've done that and it's failed that much, you have to play him at a different position, it's already going to reflect fairly poorly. You're probably going to wager being able to take him and play him at offensive tackle and try to avoid the chaotic situation of having to put them at guard and explain your draft pick then for taking a guard in the top 10.
I mean, listen, if the guy turns out to be a Hall of Famer, no one's going to really bitch about it.
That's true. I mean, if the guy comes out to be a Hall of Fame guard, I think they'll get over it.
Now, I do have a couple of more questions before we wrap things up. Let's kick it inside. All right. Let's talk about the guards. Let's talk about the centers. We know Linderbaum is your top interior offensive line, your top overall offensive lineman. Are there any other interior guys who really stand out to you as potential top 10, top 15 picks? Anyone that really impresses you?
In terms of pure interior guys, not really.
Okay.
Because I do have, like you mentioned this earlier, I do have Kenyon Green up there, and Kenyon Green's a guy who I view now as a guard prospect purely.
Yeah.
I think he can play some tackle, be like an emergency tackle.
Mm-hmm.
I think some teams might even try giving him snaps to tackle just to see if he can do it. And if he can't, they'll be fine taking him at guard. But he's probably the closest guy that I can think about as someone who will stick in there and be a pure interior offensive line that's going to be up that high on my board. Looking at my next best guy available, interior offensive line, is Zion Johnson at 59. And after that, it's someone who's not even in the top 100. It's down to 110. So in terms of pure interior offensive lineman, maybe Ed Ingram from LSU, who at 115 at guard. Ed Ingram's a pretty good player, but I think he's dealt with some injuries recently. So that's probably one of the next guys you want to look at. Someone like Jamari Salyer from Georgia, who's playing left tackle right now for them, is going to be probably playing guard in the NFL. That's someone you might want to look at. So in terms of that, it's probably those guys. But it's going to be a lot of tackles converted to guards or tackle/guard prospects. Not many pure guards in this draft class are going to be viewed as top 60 picks.
How many offensive linemen do you think we could legitimately see go in the first round this year? Do you really just think it might just be that those top five guys I mentioned earlier? Or do you think you see somebody sneak in?
No, there's almost always a sixth dude that someone will like. And in this class, I think it's probably going to be either like Nicholas Petit-Frere from Ohio State, or it's going to be Trevor Penning from Northern Iowa. Those two guys stand out to me quite a bit. The other guys who I think will have some talk will probably be someone like Darren Kennard from Kentucky. Mm-hmm. I know some teams use a guard, some teams use a tackle. He's really dominant in the run. Of course, Kentucky loves to run the ball with Chris Rodriguez, so he looks really good on film. The pure pass sets are probably going to be something a little bit different with him, which is probably why he won't go in the first round, even though he's only allowed 8 pressures this year. The other one who might get some run is Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan. Again, in Central Michigan, though, you're playing against a lot lesser competition. And he's, I think, a little bit of an older prospect, a little bit more of an inexperienced guy, too, in terms of what he's done. He's 6'7", 305 pounds, a little bit on the lighter side. So there's going to be some concerns about that. He only recently converted from tight end to tackle. He only has 2 years at starting left tackle. So the inexperience will probably doom in there, making like a second-round pick or a third-round pick. But I would say Petit-Frere and then Trevor Penning are your next best guys.
So outside of those top 5 guys, you're saying what was it? Petit-Frere and Trevor Penning, yeah?
Yeah, those two are probably the most likely, in my opinion, to get into the first round.
Which one of them do you like more at this point?
I like Petit-Frere right now because you have the reps of him going against elite pass rushers, and there are a lot of elite guys he faced. It's not necessarily the best tape. It's kind of ugly at points, especially when you go against Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo. Arnold Ebikebi getting some issues as well. But we at least have seen him go up against guys you know are going to be first-round picks, or at least going to be top 60 selections. It cannot get worse than what we saw in those games. So you have kind of like the floor to build your way up with him. And I can appreciate that. And this is a guy who played right tackle. They actually moved him left tackle this year. And they moved Thayer Munford, who was a pretty good left tackle himself, inside the guard to make way for Ferrer. So I think that you have to take that into account. I view him as being a guy who could be a first-round pick, but probably going to be in the final 2 or 3 selections of the round. I don't think he's going to be like a mid-20s guy. He'll probably be a late 20s to 30s guy. And Trevor Penning, like Northern Iowa's had some pretty good tackles in the past. I think Spencer Brown came out last year and is in Buffalo right now. Mm-hmm. But Trevor Penning is going to be better than Spencer Brown was, which is a huge compliment to him. I just don't know how I feel about these guys coming in from these smaller schools who are just – I feel like I like watching the guys who I know have tape against guys you're going to play against in the NFL versus someone like Trevor Penning, who gets to dominate the lesser competition. Might be a tremendous player. I still have to get a little more time watching him because it's hard to sometimes find those games. Mm-hmm. But I still feel more comfortable with the guys who I know have reps against future NFL players.
I actually love Penning. He only allowed one sack this past year on 654 plays over 13 games that he started. One of the best offensive linemen in the country. The question of the talent that he goes up against is absolutely a concern. But I mean, when you look at it, at least on the surface, one of the things I like to look at when I'm watching tape is how does he look aside from the feet, from the hands, from the leverage, from, the hips, aside from all that stuff, when you're looking at O-line, I want to see how he looks. Does he look like an NFL player? Does he look like he's got the talent to bowl with these big league boys? And he does. He looks athletic. He's long. He's 6'7", 330 pounds. He's powerful. And I mean, even if you've never scouted before and you don't know what to look for and you're starting out, when you see a big man move like he does, it's not quite worse, but I think he's got first round athleticism. And his kick slide is right. That's something that stood out to me in pass protection. And he does have questions. He is someone who can get beat off the line by speedy guys, but that's going to be a problem for any big guy like that.
And leverage might be an issue for him too at that size, probably. Leverage and hand usage are going to be huge for him.
Yep, but once he gets his hands on you, he's one of those where you're not going anywhere. So there's a lot of positives there, and I think he's a lot better than his former teammate that you were talking about that got drafted by Buffalo. But I don't know if
Spencer Brown.
Yeah, Spencer Brown. But I don't know if Penning is a first-round pick. I think he could sneak into the back end of the first round because everyone needs offensive line help. We know that. Yeah. But it is worth looking more into. And I have a lot of different notes on him and stuff like that. And he is one of the guys that I've tagged to check out. I'm not going to be giving him a first-round grade. I'm also stingy with those, but it is definitely something I'm going to be looking more at as the offseason goes on. But before we call it quits here, I do want to thank you guys again for tuning in. We are powered by Betting.net. Betting.net finds the best promotions, offers, and bonus codes so you don't have to. Head on over to their website, Betting.net, right now to take advantage of things like free bets and matching deposits. So with that in mind, Sam, do you have any final thoughts, questions, comments, concerns?
No, not really. I'm about ready to watch Ben Roethlisberger's hopefully final game at Heinz Field. I do not want him back next year, but I'm just hyped to see Pittsburgh finally play one more game at Heinz Field this year and maybe just finally end the season one more week after this. But I just want the season to be over at this point, frankly, for Pittsburgh at least.
You know what? I'm going to ask you one quick question before we go. Talking about Pittsburgh, talking about Big Ben. He's out after this year. I don't care if he wants to come back. He's out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's more likely? Pittsburgh drafts their replacement, signs or trades for their replacement, or they just roll with Haskins and Mason Rudolph.
Oh, God, please not that last one. Please not Haskins and Rudolph. I find it more likely that they are going to sign or trade for someone. I could see him bringing in a Teddy Bridgewater level kind of guy for a year or two, which is not a great thing to do. But in this quarterback class, you don't love a guy, just pushing off for a year. There's no reason to waste a first round pick on a guy you don't love.
Especially picking in the middle of the first round. If Corral and Pickett are off the board, you're not going to take.
No. Now, if Malik Willis is sitting there in the second round, maybe you could do that might be worth the investment. Might be worth it because the risk is a lot lower. But in the first round, don't reach for a QB. Just don't do it.
Yo, shades of a poor man's Cordero Stewart, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's yeah. No, I've seen Cordero Stewart in the news a lot. They talk about him because of all the, frankly, because of guys like Malik Willis and Cordero Stewart coming back and being a modern name everyone's talking about now, SportsCenter and stuff is kind of cool.
I remember him, man. I remember him. He had his run at quarterback. Little weapon all over before he started him at Q. I remember that, man. Oh my God, I feel old talking about Cordero. Oh anyway, so thank you guys for tuning in. I am Dan Kornhauser. He is Sam Teets. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. And we are on Instagram. We are on Twitter. At least I am on both. Sam is definitely on Twitter. Sam, what's your handle?
Yeah, you can follow me on Sam_Teets33. That's SAM_TEETS33. That's where I post all my draft content, all my sports news. You can check it out there.
And what is the website that you run?
Yeah, so you want to head over to Substack.com. You can check out Sports Talk with Sam Tietz. It's from a newsletter where I post all my draft content. Everything I do sports-wise is going to end up there at some point, so you can check that out.
Perfect. I love it. And me, I am on Instagram and on Twitter. The handle is DB Talking Sports. D as in Dan, B as in Bob. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy New Year to you, Sam. Enjoy the game tonight. Hopefully the Steelers get a win. I did pick them in my weekly pick'em show with Mike and Steve, so I am rooting for Pittsburgh here. And enjoy the national championship, and we'll talk next week.
Yep, sounds good.
Have a good one, guys. Good night.